Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back for yet another space. This one was completely rethought, given the multiple things that happened in between. So it will be a dense space, mostly regarding how much the previous, I'd say, vision for the year 2025 is sticking to the points that we made around the January 2025. There is a thread on it that you can read. I posted it, and there are a couple of spaces. If you want to still read them, you just go on TWK Radio on YouTube. It's not my account, so it will be depending on our friend upon the spaces being available, and they are, especially around the month of January, February, they're completely complete. So, generally speaking, you have to go through at least 5 spaces to actually compile everything that was announced prior to that. And then there are 2 threads, as I said, one in January, 5th of January 2025, and another one, an explicative actually, couple of answers around the month of March 2025. First things first, well, we saw it, and it's extremely painful because the operation from the SBU to strike on the Russian strategic aviation left scars, especially among Ziggers, because despite the fact that I actually had said this since January 2025, even before that, that Ukraine was going to be more and more about this, so flashy, big PR moves. In this case, it's well coordinated because it's PR and there is a huge damage done. Not terminal, thank God, but still, there is no way to downplay it. And honestly, I'd say for some reason, every single time the Russians are quote unquote lucky that the operation from the other side doesn't go fully as planned, and on top of it that the Ukrainians are the way they are. So being a bit vain, they do not check for a kind of foolproof execution. Honestly, if everything would have gone the way it should have been going, probably would have been sitting on a pile of 40 to 50 airplanes burned or terminally critically damaged. And instead of that, we have about 12 to 13 planes that are gone, and probably another 10 or so that are damaged, for which the repairs would have to be checked upon. And of course, the major takeaway from this is that you should never wage a war against yourself, because you know yourself better than anyone else. And if you don't know yourself better than anyone else, well, basically you are either a sociopath or there is something wrong about you. So the whole operation, from what is known right now, is a perfect use, straightforward use of perfidy, and it's great. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not even mad about that. I'm mad about how people react. Because I pointed out that for the Ukrainians, this was going to be the only way to blow up steam, given how bad it was going to the front. And this is what makes this current situation, with a lot of Ziggers literally losing it and asking for nukes on Kiev, on blowing bridges and dams and stuff. As I said, that is a type of war that Russia will obviously not wage unless it is going down. And at that point, honestly, it would be already too late, if we have to be honest. Now, the issue though is that, as I said, now the Ukrainians shot their shot, then there was the attempt on the bridge itself, and this is where it's beautiful. This is why Ukraine, despite the fact that they have something, they need to make shit up the attempt on the bridge was more than probably an attempt by a localized team. If you followed up, Criminfo pointed out that they had arrested the Ukrainian guy assembling an explosive device, and the same day you had already attack, and after that, 6 to 8 hours later, you had an attempt by USVs to go through the bridge. Once again, Ukraine will do its utmost to take away the focus from the war and break the monotony of the grind that the Russians are putting on them. And it works. I mean, like, if you want an evidence of that, just look at all the Ziggers that right now want some kind of Holocaust, a THD, shit like that. And once again, this is not me being against any of this. I'm just saying that, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you see this, the leadership in Russia just doesn't want to do it. Because at some point, 2022, 2023, there were issues that we're discussing. Maybe they don't have the capability to do that. Unfortunately, they proved it. They brought down the Antonov Bridge in Kherson with one Iskander strike. That bridge had survived over 300 strikes of HIMARS. And these guys just blew up a span with one Iskander. It was done. It was even a very funny moment and joke that everybody was complaining at some point that why didn't you do this with the other bridges if it's that easy? First of all, it's not that easy. And second of all, the reason, and whether there's going to be a debate over that, especially after the war, on why didn't the Russians cut the Ukrainian logistics. One of the versions that I have, and I'm more and more convinced about that, is that simply trying to do that would precipitate a all-azimuth exodus of the remaining Ukrainian population, which would be a very positive. If you are purely amoral and do not look at anything else, it's a very positive development. But the price for that amok running of the Ukrainian civilian population, of which, as I said, a huge part of between 8 and 11 million, depending on who you listen, on the eastern bank of the Dnieper, you're going to have 4 or 4.5 million civilians and pensioners. So basically people who have issues with mobility and who you would need to take away. So these people, either they do not move, they stay there, but we're speaking about areas that are 60, 70 kilometers from the front, for which someone would need to provide until the Russians reach them. And the other aspect is that it will still not be enough to stymie the Ukrainian military logistics. And it's completely normal. The Ukrainians are trying to hold the line. They do not care about the civilians. I already provided the example of Nikolaev. There are other such examples. What the Ukrainians are going to do, if the amount of people they need to take care of is too important, they will just leave them rot. If it's a small batch of evacuees, between 100 and maybe 2,000 to 3,000, and they have the time to do that in advance, they will do it. But if you are speaking about, as I said, a mass strike over the bridges, when you're going to take out over the 14, 15 crossings that are still available, you're going to take out 8 or 9 at a time. You have to understand the kind of panic that will cause. Even if it's an interruption of 1 or 2 days. It's like a canary in a coal mine. Once you signal that, you're going to have the exodus. You can pretend that it's not going to happen. You can pretend like some Italian retard that everything's going to be fine, nobody's going to starve. But the road's not going to be clogged, and that even half or 1 million people on the roads, the shitty road network in Ukraine is going to be all fine and cool. That borders insanity, and that borders a very childish regard for human life. Now, once again, all this has nothing to do with how I see the stuff. I think that people who know me since the beginning or before this war, they know that that was my approach, and I have not changed my opinion. If you want to win this war decisively, you would have to do it. Now, the problem with having to do that and doing it is that the narrative that is already there. I mean, like, I'm gonna be honest with you guys. Your Russians evacuated kids from a war zone, and Putin and the ombudsman for the children affair got an ICC warrant for fucking genocide. The game is rigged when it comes to both PR and also legal aspects. And of course, you're gonna say, yeah, but it's a war, they invaded. And I'm the first one to say, yes, that's true. The problem is, there is a difference between actually fighting a war and construed realities like what happened with the kids, and actually doing something that, even if you don't want it to happen, the level of disorganized shit show that is Ukraine in this moment, when it comes to generally working, is just gonna cost you a couple thousand dead. Be that you're gonna have accidents, some columns gonna get attacked by the Russians or by the Ukrainians. They're gonna blow up on mines. They're gonna try and cross the Dnieper without the proper equipment. They're gonna drown. I mean, it's going to trickle down, and generally speaking, it's going to be an extremely negative optic for anyone who's going to support Russia. I'm pretty sorry about that. You can, as I said, play it in a very immoral sense and say, okay, it's going to be like this, and that's how it is. And I'm the first one to say, to me, it doesn't actually matter. To me, just do it and deal with the consequences later. The problem with this attitude, and this was mine for a long time, and it's still mine, is that you're going to reach a breaking point when it comes to how both sides are watching this war unfold. And when I say both sides, I'm not speaking about the Ukrainians, of course. I'm speaking about the Western side and the Russian side. And when it comes to the Russian side, I do not think that the Chinese are going to be very pleased to see the kind of shit show happening. I mean, in a certain sense, you'd say, like, where's the difference with a X101 going astray and nuking a bunch of kids or blowing up a supermarket? The scale, the intention, pulling the trigger on blowing the bridges or the dams or whatever is going to play on the intention. You cannot pretend, oh, I didn't know that these guys were going to get trampled, these guys were going to get abandoned. Because on the other side, it doesn't mean that you're going to blow the bridges and everybody's going to flee. When I say everybody, I'm speaking the Ukrainian military. As I said, and I'm going to repeat, the Ukrainian military, logistically speaking, doesn't need much. They could do with a couple of pontoons, far enough from each other. Okay, they're going to lose maybe one a week. During transit, not during transit. They're just going to go at it. If it was the same kind of scenario as it was in Kherson, with a one side being squeezed within 25, 30 kilometers, as it happened, and the other side having a stretched depth, I would understand. But unless something very wrong happens with the Ukrainian army, they have a 200, 250, up to 277 depth in their backs until the Dnieper River. The main issue for them, and that's the only point that you can actually discuss, is dealing with this civilian situation. But as I said, in the worst case scenario, what's going to happen is that what I just said is that they're just going to tell them to leave whenever they can. So they're going to cross, I don't know, in Russian controlled territory or Russian territory or Belarusian territory. But for the guys who are at the center of the defensive system right now, they would have to drive for about 400 kilometers in average before going to the checkpoints. And what happens to the checkpoints? Who is going to vet these guys? We can also take the other idea that it's going to be done gradually, because not everything's going to go haywire right away. And I agree with that. It's the gradual part that's going to make it even worse, because you're going to see those remote villages started to empty first, and then smaller settlements, bigger and bigger. So the people who's going to be left behind for whatever reason, those are goners. It's as simple as that. You can try and have whatever kind of bullshit. Doesn't really matter. And on top of it, as I said, getting them to evacuate, be that in Russian territory, Belarusian territory, or cross in any kind of way on the other side of the Dnieper, is tantamount. Unfortunately, you can say whatever the fuck you want to ethnic cleansing. And once again, I don't really care. This is not me protesting over that. I'm just saying that the people who are at the helm of the Russian effort in Ukraine do not agree with you guys. Or with me. So the point here is not to start saying something pathetic or that. The point is to understand what the other guys are seeing. You cannot agree with that, and I don't give a fuck. But you have to understand why things are not happening. Sometimes when there is the need to communicate that the Russians are not happy, stuff happened. Bridges were blown at some point in Zaporozhye. The TWK dam was hit so badly that I couldn't repair it for 2 years. It's not a matter of capability. It's unfortunately a matter of consequences if you execute the plan as it should be. And I had, as I told you, from the beginning of the war, I had a list of 146, 47 targets that could have made Ukraine a lot worse. And it never happened. And the Russians spent, in average, 30,000 missiles and ballistics and everything. Not talking about Shaheeds or any other kind of long-range system. So the point here, when it comes to that, is that politically and morally, right now that's a red line. And because of that, the Ukrainians can get away with what happened in Olenia and Belaya. And this thing I pointed out to you guys, the Ukrainians, especially Gur, they are not watching the war. They don't care about the war. That is lost or won. They don't really fucking give a shit. That's why you had Drapati resigning. And I wasn't expecting Zelekoka to actually accept the resign from the head of the ground forces. And Zelekoka just accepted it, because he knows that the situation, the general situation of the war is shit for Ukraine. And everything that he's trying to do right now is peripheral pressure. Going to the US for sanctions, embarrassing the Russians, quote unquote, attempting to score PR victories with attack on the bridge, inventing shit that, like today, we destroyed in this damage to others. I'm like, nah, let's see. At the same time, you start checking at the map and you see exactly what we discussed in January. I mean, everything that has happened to the Ukrainian military from January to now, you can go fucking read that thread and you're gonna see, oh, this is funny because it clicks. And yes, it clicks because that's what happens to a structure or institution that tries to shuffle itself within a larger adverse situation. And we had everything. We had Drapati resigning over what he said was enshrined corruption and lack of accountability within the Ukrainian military. Reminder that Drapati was sold as Tatarigimi, by Tatarigimi as a fresh breath of air and someone who was going to change everything because meritocracy, yada yada bullshit. And then we had one brigade leadership that was decapitated because they were treating their people as crap. Another that gave up his role as the ICSO of the unmanned systems because, well, unmanned systems can buoy you so long, can keep you in the fight for so long, but after that you have real issues. And as I explained already in that thread, the issues are a lack of manpower, a lack of a viable strategy on fighting Russia, and most importantly, a misconception on what's going wrong with Ukraine. And once again, the misconception is that you should not talk about the losses, because that's the problem. The Ukrainians have a major problem with basically people coming and going. The issue is that they don't come back alive. The issue is that most of the time people get enlisted, get deployed, and back at that thread I had surmised that at least 40% of the Ukrainian military, according to the numbers they had given themselves, would be a casualty. And it doesn't matter that it's going to die. Casualties, you're wounded, you're captured. And then there was also the problem with the AWOL/deserter issue. That hasn't been solved either. Reminded that the Ukrainians tried in 2024 through a decree to allow people to come back to the units. And for instance, one of the numbers that we heard was that out of the 123,000 files that were open for desertion or unlawful abandonment of their combat post, only 21,000 had returned, and for the rest, we don't know where they are. This attrition was illustrated very recently after the second round of talks in Istanbul, where the Russians unilaterally said that we're going to give you 6,000 bodies. And of course, the bodies, everybody understood. Everybody was followed your losses. And us, of course, the bodies are coming from Kursk. And the Kursk situation, if it wasn't for the shit show against the Russian strategic aviation, would have been the cornerstone of this space. But unfortunately, as I said, the Ukrainians, as usual, have the gift to spoil things. And now the attention is out of the roughly 800 square kilometers lost in 30 days, but it is to the 13, 13 frames that were damaged or destroyed. And that's it. That has been, I'm going to repeat, and I said that initially, that's the only way out right now. Making everybody forget about what the reality is, flashing one or two of these ops, and just kicking the can down the road. It doesn't matter, once again, that you are losing whole swathes, that your positional situation has gone to shit. You had fun. You blew up some planes, you did some perfidy, and now you can yap and tap for probably a couple of weeks. And in the PR game, they're undefeated, because even if tomorrow Russia goes and hangs Maluk by the balls and cuts his Cane Corso's head and put it up his ass, it will be seen as a barbarian act of a terrorist state. Even if tomorrow Zelensky goes to eat somewhere and the whole fucking restaurant is blown up, it would be a horrible attack against democracy. It's not going to be a gutsy covert operation. No, it's going to be bad Russians doing bad shit. And on the other side, it's going to be brave Ukrainians being inventive and shitting all over the customary law of warfare, but it doesn't matter. They are the defenders, so they can be afforded to do some mistakes from time to time. That's why, as I told you guys, it doesn't matter what you think. It still is a skirmish. To the war that they're losing. And the funny part with the way they're losing this war is that the guys who you should look at for the front, they're shitting their pants. The Bahmutsky Demon, the Govorit Sniper, the Officer Alexis, all these people are saying that actually everything's sepizda. But it doesn't really matter, because 13 aircraft, man, in small containers. Imagine that. Fucking around with the big bear and lying to his face and subverting his system, taking advantage of the society that Russia still is. And that's the whole point. And that's why I'm telling to everybody, the problem you're going to have with this is that a lot of stuff is not going to fly the same anymore. And it's also one of the, I think, the goals that the Ukrainians want absolutely to pull with this op is to deny normalcy to Russia. Because this is the core enabler of that operation. Russia hasn't gone into this fully martial law situation when everybody's going to get checked. There is, in my opinion, and that's how the whole transport went along the whole fucking Russian Federation from Chelyabinsk to Murmansk. There is no real control about going from region to region. In Ukraine, you cannot do that. On top of the fact that the Ukrainian state has, with the help of the American administration, the previous one, has laid up a centralized data system for a lot of stuff. First of all, it was the control of the population. Then it was for the issue of documents. And then it was for the control of a lot of paperwork and documents that you would need to set up a company, declare your revenue, stuff like that. Initially, it looks like they are just, evolving and doing it better and automatizing a lot of stuff. But in reality, that is also a better control at the access. So your ingress point in the system, if you want to commit that kind of counter-op on the Russian side, you will have to use a pre-existing network. That pre-existing network was mostly taken out between 22 and 23. Some deeper agents were more or less recently also pulled out. But generally speaking, Russia doesn't have the same access because it's not the same kind of society up front. Ukraine right now is literally under martial law, but is a police state. Not the kind of police state you would see in Latin America or whenever, but the information control within the Ukrainian state, in my opinion, is way higher. And this makes the difference when it comes to covert ops. However, as I said, Russia doesn't need covert ops to do damage. And of course, it's going to be a lot less flashy and of course, a lot more manipulable into pushing a narrative over bad Russia killing civilians. I mean, just look at recently. Zelensky was crying about civilians dead, but the strikes and the kind of destruction we're seeing, like I'm asking what are civilians doing at 3 in the morning in a warehouse that burned to the ground. But as I said, it doesn't really matter. It's a PR war, which I honestly have given up in total. There are going to be episodes when the Russians are going to get back to the Ukrainians. But generally speaking, as with the proxy war we're having on the battlefield, there is a proxy war on the PR front as well. It's very simple. All Russian strikes on sensitive Ukrainian installations, we maybe have some kind of indication due to firms or whatever. Strikes that Ukrainians do on Russian installations, you have Maxar the very next day giving you full BDA, when it's not Russian civilians themselves actually filming this shit. So, I mean, if you want a better informational battle space control than that, you don't need to go further, I'd say. The problem with all this is that it still is remaining a dress up. Yes, as I said, the damage to the strategic bomber fleet is important. But it's a different level, which right away will not have the impact that Ukrainians want it to have. If anything, the Russians are going to check up what they need to do, and they're just going to go at it with the rest of the strategic aviation right now. And most probably this will give a whip to whatever replacement plane that the Russians are going to field. I'm not saying that tomorrow you're going to have a Baghdad. It's not that. I'm saying that at some point, the realization is that you cannot go on like this. And it doesn't matter what you're going to happen if you put the shelters, not shelters. In this case, it didn't actually matter. God damn it, ambulance. It didn't actually matter on if these were in a hangar or not. Some of the bombers were loading to be flown away. And the type of guidance chosen by the Ukrainians, which was the 4G network, LTE network, made it impossible to counter it through normal electronic warfare. So where we had better was when the local command understood, okay, these drones are not normal radio frequency ones. Just switch to 4G. There is no other way. On top of it, as I said, the bigger problem for the Russians is going to be the logistical advantage that and it's ironical to say it like this, the more normal society Russia provides for Ukraine. In Russia, you can still have some kind of ventures. In Ukraine, any kind of such ventures, okay, you're going to open your transportation company, whatever you want. Where are you going to find the money? You have to declare it. You have a centralized database. Ukraine recently dropped to D. So on certain obligations and on certain down payments, Ukraine just defaulted. So the situation within the country, the way that country is, paradoxically, should be offering opportunities to the Russian secret services to find guys there that would be displeased for whatever reason, TWK assholes, not being paid after being wounded and maimed, stuff like that. But instead of that, due to the fact that economically the system is so tighter, so much tighter than the Russian one, it doesn't mean that there is no corruption. Quite the contrary, actually. You need a different approach to get in there. And we had a lot of FPV guys or drone guys on the Russian side. We will find people in Ukraine and we will train them with FPVs and shit like that. And I was like, the problem is not to find people in Ukraine. The problem is all the logistical aspect. How many drones you're going to employ? What is going to be your ISR feed to these people? How are you going to establish both a communication channel that you'll be sure these people are going to be on your side, is not going to be a counter-op? For the Ukrainians, this was easy. The dude who was the centerpiece of the operation was already in Russia. And he could do a Salotakia without the problem. The reverse for the Russians is going to be extremely complicated, especially, as I said, the threat of the TCK makes it a lot less possible for people to set up this kind of system. Information control, unified database, pervasiveness of the Ukrainian authorities in their own population has rendered Ukraine a hellhole. And people are going to say, oh, we're happy with this and that. No, you're not. How could you explain that you're losing 7 to 800,000 people every year? Half of those die, or even a bit more, about 500,000 die, and 300,000 just get the fuck out of Ukraine. That's a bit more than 1% of the total population within the areas controlled by the Ukrainian state as it stands. And it's, in total, if you put everything, it's about 2.7% of population that goes away every year, dies or flees. And we had the discussions. The birth rate is absolutely horrible. You're at 1-3 with the deaths, and the immigration process is even lower. So there is an actual slow death of the Ukrainian nation stands. And it is being helped both by the war itself, but also by the way the Ukrainian polities, the Ukrainian system coalesced around this absolutely mind-blowing suicidal tone. And it's amazing. I mean, like, you need to give it to them on that aspect. They put a whole nation into this kind of turbo-patriotic jail. And they are literally beating the shit out of them. Zelensky himself said, yeah, Russia is destroying the eastern Ukraine. But Russia is not destroying eastern Ukraine for no reason. Russia is destroying eastern Ukraine because you are fighting in eastern Ukraine. You are resisting eastern Ukraine. What you're doing right now as the president of Ukraine, you are savaging all that aspect, and I think with the afterthought that you have lost it anyway. So this is a vision of scorched earth. You are going to force the Russians to scorch earth that place. And does it matter that you're going to lose 150,000 dead? No. That logic where you were caring for the losses, I think, passed after 3 months in 2022. After that, seeing that the Russians didn't stop, the Ukrainians went like, okay, whatever. And it's exactly what's going on. It's literally, okay, whatever. The Ukrainian leadership right now doesn't care. They didn't blink and lied upon the 6,000 bodies. Umarov said we're going to exchange 6,000. I'm like, okay. that was a good one. And now the tune has changed. It's not, we're going to exchange the bodies. No, Zelensky says we need to be sure they're not giving their bodies. I'm like, that's nonsense. And you know that. Zelensky knows that what he just said is a lie. Because we have the lists of missing people for Kursk. And it's over 6,000, 900. So, this is, I think, what hurt me the most. Things, some Ziggers go nuts and reach a boiling point and flip. The people you have on the other side, they don't care. And you know what was going to be the funniest part? Let's say the op failed and the guys got owned somewhere in Chelyabinsk where they were fucking building their drones. They would have tried again. And this is one of the things I told since the beginning. You have a problem with the fact that the other side can organize to hit you. You don't have a defense problem. And of course, there is a defense problem. There is a intelligence issue here. But it is made worse by the fact that I said that you're fighting yourself. You're fighting people that know how fucking shit your system is. Because their system is shit. And yes, a lot of people are going to say that, oh, are you going back to the whole brotherhood war? No. It's not a brotherhood war. It's the same fucking people. Down to their fucking teeth. And people who are refusing it are misunderstanding. I'm not saying that Azovites are the same as Putin or whatever. No, I'm saying that their vision, their paradigm, every single thing, outside of the ideological shackles, are the same. They're going to see the same things. And the whole cell phone equipped drones was done by the Russians themselves before. As I said, the logistical part, the daring part, let's say, like the perfidy part makes this so enraging. but at the same time, so logical. We go back to Clausewitz. If you let the action go further, the other side is going to learn how to do it eventually. But so are going to do yourself. Nothing is staying low. And there we are going to the next step. The next step is that it is because the Russians learned how to deal with Ukrainians on a numbers level that now we have the situation we have back at the front, which is a way better performance than at the same time last year. And of course, at the same time 2 years ago. In reality, everything that we said late 2024, early 2025 hasn't changed. It's still valid and it's still working. The Ukrainian military has a huge manpower shortage. They try to fix it with a drone wall. Then the issue is that the Russians now are shitting optifibers. By the way, we're going to go to something else. Remember Saransk optifiber factory? Remember that piece of shit Bulgarian that was saying, oh, you know nothing, there are only one optifiber manufacturer and stuff like that. Well, there are two problems with that. I already explained it before. Simplex is easy to make. And it's even easier to buy. Now the Chinese have come with super simplex, which is even thinner, so the total weight there was actually a post for 50 kilometers of optifiber is, with the spool, less than 4 kilos. Now you're going to say 50 kilometers means almost 40-45 minutes of flight with the power-saving flight regime. And I'm like, yeah, it's going to take its time. But it is, and we explained this, it is because the optifiber system is undetectable as it stands right now, except of course if you keep flying the same routes and you have the accumulation of the wires on the ground, as I posted the picture previously. But by extending these ranges and lowering the prices of super simplex or simplex, it doesn't really matter, the war is going on the wrong way for the Ukrainians. And this logic, I already explained it last year, is very simple. You have less Ukrainians, less Ukrainian targets. Instead of doing as before, when you would send 100 drones for 20 targets, and maybe half of those would hit, taking out maybe 9 to 10 targets that you need, but the rest would be able to continue, you had a gap in efficiency. Because once you do the analysis, you are only 50% efficient, but with a 10% hits. You send 100, you hit only 10. That means only 50% of the enemy threats is, eliminated or taken out. This means that the Ukrainian forces could survive, even if with large expenditure of radio frequency drones. Now, due to the ongoing attrition, Ukrainian forces are having 10 targets at disposal. But due to the optifiber and other incremental technologies, now out of those 10 targets, with 20 optifibers, you can hit, in average, every target with 1.5 optifiber, if not 100%. But sometimes it fails, we've seen that. So what happens is that you have less drone to play with, you need less drone to play with, you hit every single target, and you double check some of them. What does this mean? This means that your expenditure goes lower. You can be stealthier for a long time, and you take every single target out. The efficiency now is 100%, and the expenditure is 400% less than initially. Actually 80%, but if we go to the 2000. This is something Ukrainians know. They knew this the moment when they got raped by Optifiber in August 2024. What they didn't know is how much the whole Kursk adventure and the posture that had assumed with Kursk and Donbass was going to hurt them. For that, I pointed out Tatar Gemi was lukewarm about the Kursk thing. He still was like, hey, it's unclear, let's see how it plays. Timur Criminal told you guys the day it happened, that was the greatest catastrophe that would befall on the Ukrainian forces. And everything you're listening right now, you can go back and look at the spaces, start to pick up the stuff that we said, and you're going to understand it's exactly that. There is nothing else. There is nothing else to be said anymore. So we have entered this grind situation where the Russians are just going to plow the Ukrainians in the ground by any dramatic shift in technologies. And so some Martian comes in and gives the Black Sea digger people alien technology, which zaps every single Moscow. But I do not believe that. It would be funny though, because the first thing they would do, they would zap themselves as much as I would like. They are that retarded. But the logic here is that the Ukrainians have understood, at least those who are not stupid completely, they have understood what the problem is for them right now. The problem is that technology-wise, it doesn't matter how small the gap is right now. The Russians have found a cheap way to use the Optifiber for almost everything, coupled with, as I said, SIR technology, and also more and more pervasive ISR. Remember something else I told you guys. Remember, roughly around the month of September 2024, we had Sternenko and co. Publishing hundreds of interceptions or attempted interceptions. And there were those rumors that taking out the Russian ISR, low-level and intermediate-level ISR, would spell doom for the Russian forces. Remember that? I had people literally crying on me. We had this discussion with people who are supposedly far more intelligent than this. Where is that now? Instead, what has happened is that since the establishing of the Rubicon Center by the SSO, the Russians are now hunting Baba Yagas, which are 50% of the long-range firepower of the Ukrainian forces. And unfortunately, you can see what's going on. The Baba Yagas, which were poisoned for frontal combat, so basically they would just visit the Russian forces by night and blow everything they could, tanks, artillery, whatever. Now the Baba Yagas are getting hunted to the point where you have parts of the front where the drone teams are now begging to get Baba Yagas or money to buy Baba Yagas. And by hunting the Baba Yagas, the Russians have taken the whole Brave One bullshit at their own advantage. If you don't know what Brave One is this gamified transactional system that the Ukrainian forces have established in order to reward the units for their deeds. So basically you kill a Russian soldier or mine, whatever, you get points, and based on these points you're going to get drones, supplies and stuff like that. Well, by going after the Baba Yagas, which, as I said, were a huge part of the system, What the Russians are doing is depriving these guys from results. But because of the Brave One system, if you don't score, you don't get anything. Given that your scoring system is the Baba Yaga, having less of them means you having less potential. So, by the own self-defeating logic of the system, being less able to score points means scoring less points. Scoring less points means you have less equipment overall and supplies. Having less equipment and supplies overall means that your pool of action is smaller. So if the fucking Moscow goes back and shrinks it even lesser, you will have units that don't do anything important in whole swaths of the front. This gamified logic initially might seem stupid, like, what the fuck are you saying? But it has actual repercussions. One of them is that at some point, and this is what happened to Sukharevsky. Sukharevsky in Pokrovsk wanted to get the fuck out because he couldn't do his job. Mostly because, and this is something that was said multiple times by the usual suspects on the Ukrainian side, Russians were going after drone teams. And once again, guys, this is what I told you. Leveling the playing field. We have the time and you have the watches will always work, especially if the one side is bigger. It doesn't matter how determined is the other side. And this is, I'm going to say, as a Balkanic, this is a historical lesson we learned the hard way. You can be smarter, you can be braver, you can whatever. If the other guys have enough to fucking bury you on their bodies, they will do it. But this is not even the case anymore. Russians are not burying Ukrainians under the bodies. The Russians are taking Ukrainians to the woods with the same tools that they suffered for the year 22, 23, and 24. And they are not even dominating them. You do not see the Russians like completely ruining the mood of the Ukrainian forces, but Baba Yaga is the same way. No, most of it is opti-fibers finding these assholes hidden in the woods, blowing them up, and then next 2 days, guys with bikes or scooters or donkeys or ladas or whatever rush to the positions, wipe the shit of them out, and tada, it's done. And they keep going. And on the other side, tactically, I recently, I think 25th of May, posted a thread over the misconception of a lot of people regarding what the Russians were doing and why, quote unquote, Pokrovsk was stalled, which in all fairness, it has. But not the way the Ukrainians are presenting it. And this is, you could see it. What's going on right now is that the Russians are going after the supply lines of both cities, Konstantinovka and Pokrovsk. In the Konstantinovka seam, as I said, it's a lot easier for the Russians because they kept mauling the few units that were left there while the Ukrainians were shitting the bed with Kursk. And because the Russians fixated so strongly the Ukrainians around Pokrovsk, where Drapatiti literally wasted a lot more assets that he would have done, Kursk was a complete shit show. And that is mostly what happened, why Pokrovsk, Konstantinovka, and what's going to happen around the Kupiansk axis or the Borova axis is happening. So, bis repetita, if we go back to what was said in January, I said, first of all, it doesn't matter what the Ukrainians are going to try and do with their force structure, putting brigades back to divisions or divisions back to corps is not going to change anything, because the problem that you have is not that the system currently you have, the OTGs, OTUs, whatever you want to call them, so the ad hoc groupings that you have there, are obsolete. What is obsolete is the feeding that these groupings have. But if you have a linear grouping who cannot survive on its own, and you want to turn that grouping into something bigger, you will have the same problem. And this is one of the anecdotes I explained when, I was a tanker. Because we had less money, everything was pulled together and given to one repair center to quote unquote be a lot more, how can I say this, efficient, using more efficiently the tools at disposal. Reality is that we just didn't have the teams to properly service the whole battalion. And suddenly, we don't even have enough drivers for the rest of the battalion. Same thing for the Ukrainians. You are going to restructure your core units and your action groups. The problem is that where are the forces coming from? If it's just pulling together all the shit units and sorting them out, fine. But this doesn't grow your, fighting potential. And on top of it, by, making a smaller grouping bigger by joining two smaller grouping inside, this doesn't mean that you're going to have the efficiency or the force structure to do what you need to do. What you're doing right now is just fusing everything together and hoping it's going to gel. And that's exactly what I think the big issue was, for instance, between Drapati and Syrski. Drapati had this group, and he tried, in my opinion, to do the same thing that it had for his group for the rest of the armed forces, and then he understood that his group might have been well prepared and well supplied, but the game that was happening, and we explained this when Kursk initially started, to do Kursk, Syrski and the bigger OKW just grabbed everything they could, put them together, and made a Kampf group out of it. Fast forward comes Drapati and says like, I would like to do what I'm doing with Kortitsa for everyone else. Let's see how much I have. And suddenly, oh shit, everything has gone to Kursk, and we wasted about 1,000 pieces of equipment. That's sure. And on top of it, he starts his own shadow counter in Pokrovsk, where instead of actually pushing the Russians back from the Solona River, he bogs himself down to shit, and the Russians are bypassing on both sides now. And one thing I told you, at some point, Monkey understood, you cannot do both things at the same time. Especially because Ukrainians were still feeding Kursk like crazy. So finish Kursk, and then go back to normal business. But once Kursk was finished, quote unquote, something happened, I think that was beyond what the Russians were expecting. They're now discovering that the whole Kursk maneuver burned the shit out of the Sumy grouping. Those guys cannot defend in Kursk for a myriad of reasons, but mostly because the equipment, the manpower, and everything is not coming there. Because suddenly, the motherfucking Russians are doing 3 different pushes in 3 different areas of the front. Now it's whatever you have, like, if you have a monkey GIF, just post it. Like, are you serious? Yes, that's the thing. The problem that Ukrainians have, I'm going to repeat what I said, is that they are denying the attrition. You take the 6,000. they don't understand why the attrition is happening. And suddenly you understand, oh, the attrition is happening because you chose to fight in the open for 10 months in Russian territory, you dumbass motherfucker. So, those forces that you fucking lost in Kursk, the equipment, plus what's going on in Sumy right now, could have perfectly have been used somewhere else. And the shtick, the shibboleth that was used to justify Kursk, never was there. The Russians weren't ready to attack Sumy. You saw who the fuck was there. Couple of Ahmad people, lot of conscripts, not that much equipment. For fuck's sake, when the Russians got overrun in Kharkov, the first week, they lost as much as 1/3 that I have lost over 10 months in Kursk. Instead, what we have right now, and this is the fun part, is the Ukrainians first failing to understand the mistake of keeping going to Kursk, then failing to understand what the Russians want to do now, because when you see what the Russians are doing with Sumy, there's this whole logic of buffer zone. But I don't believe that the Russians are going to make a buffer zone in Sumy. And I said this in the group over a year ago, and it was related to the conditions that Monkey gave in June 2024. There were a couple of provisions that alarmed the Ukrainians, and I think that because of that, Ukrainians went to war. One of those conditions were that parts of the border would have been to be straightened up, or let's call it like this, rationalized. And I think those proposals from the Russian side in 2024 in June, plus the pressure that the Russians were putting on Kharkov and in Donbass last year around the same time, alarmed the Ukrainians, which then jumped the shark. They said, okay, we're getting basically raped here, so why not, try something to divert these guys from raping us? And Kursk was born. And I'm pretty sure that it is, as I said, those demands from the Russians for buffer zones and whatnot around the area of Kursk and Kharkov that panicked the Ukrainians and that were used as a justification. I'm pretty sure that if we check the minutiae of the decision making around Kursk, we would have a couple of things related to what the Russian delegation was saying behind closed doors in 2024. And remember what it was establishing the Black Sea grain deal, stopping the attacks over infrastructure, energy infrastructure and oil infrastructure. Having some kind of drawdown in violence, let's say it like this. And then they submitted a couple of things in private that I think were the reason for the current inferno that the Ukrainian forces are being submitted to. I think this is what makes the most sense for what happened to Ukrainians in Kursk, why they decided to do that folly. On the other part, one thing that is also popping out, if you around the I think it was October 2024, we spoke about how Pokrovsk would go. And we got it. The Ukrainians went to shit by shedding a lot of their equipment and men to try and keep Pokrovsk as it is. They made no difference except getting fixated themselves over there, and the Russians, of course, and now getting slowly bypassed on two other sides. Now, are these people stupid? They're not stupid. I think they are having a bit of tunnel vision, but I think also that on both sides, what the rant I had in the beginning with how political decisions on the Russian side are hamstringing them a little bit when it comes to what they could do to expedite the war, although it would require to accept to commit aeons bigger war crimes. I think Ukrainians have the same type of variation, but it has to do with what we said before, the fixation, the absolute mind-blowingly bad idea to make the Russians pay for everything publicly. This idea to humiliate the Russians is backfiring spectacularly for the Ukrainians. Because, as I said, it decouples what their special services are doing with the reality. And I did the joke. The mobilized who are going to get executed, I hope they're going to smile that 13 planes or whatever planes were blown up. Their life, their everyday life, has no linkage with what happened in Murmansk. And we're seeing it. I mean, just open the maps. There's an acceleration. And this acceleration is not stopped by a lot of strategic aircraft going bust. But the Ukrainians don't care. For the Ukrainians, at least those guys at SBU, GUR, whatever you want, they are going to go for the most outrageously useless ops. We're going to blow a pillar of the Crimean bridge. Like, why? What's the point? And in a certain sense, I understand what the point is. For them, they are this skunk works kind of stuff within Ukraine, and they are there to hurt as much as they can. It doesn't matter if in 2 or 3 months, Zelensky gets another 6,000 body bags. We blew strategic aircraft. Give us medals, man. And I have the same problem here. I'm like, yeah, good. Good for you. And I think this reinforces what I told you. Like, I think a part of the Ukrainian military doesn't give a fuck about the war anymore. They, in a certain sense, are jaded and they know they're not going to get most of the territory back, if any. So why not just have fun, quote unquote? And it makes sense. Loss for loss, just make the other side pay as much as possible. Especially if it's humiliating. The problem with that is that it also refuses to think about an aftermath. And as I said, let's say that you're going to go left and right, up and down, and still you lose the war. And part of the settlement in my opinion, would be to give some people. Because you're going to lose the war. So the only thing you can do is either you protect them or you park them somewhere secretly. That means that those guys have a death mark upon them. And it's not like Mossad bullshit. No, I really do think that the Russians are going to settle scores after the end of the war. Because this is the problem with this war. It is easier for guys to survive within the war than outside of it. Within the war, there's a system around you. There is action. And if you die, you die. I mean, like, that's the whole point of the war. But outside, you need to be careful over everything. You're going to become paranoid. And then you're going to make a mistake. That mistake is going to cost you your life. But the anxiety of that weight, that sometimes at some point, Dima the butcher is going to wait for you with a fucking pickaxe. It's a different mental image. In the war, you're full of adrenaline. You're doing what you need to do. It's fine. And you're scoring points. After the war, good luck. Now, when it comes to what next, as I said about 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, it's pretty obvious what the Russians are trying to do right now. First of all, they are trying to cut the salient underneath Konstantinovka. Second, around that same area, they've made good progress in Yablunivka. In Yablunivka, as I said, you have a plotted defense that Ukrainians had created to filter assault groups in. They are starting to lose that plotted defense, and losing that, as I said, would open the weakest flank for the Ukrainian forces to Russian assaults. Weakest flank for Konstantinovka is the right head-on flank, because Konstantinovka, as you know, like most of the sister cities in Donetsk, is on a valley. So losing Yablunivka and then having the Russians go over the Bichok and grabbing Yilinka is literally game over. They're gonna have the high ground, and from that high ground, it's about 2 kilometers downrange. And that means any kind of FPV is gonna fucking fly up to your face. On top of it, as I said, if they go up to Sergivka and then to Stepanivka, they're gonna have this whole cluster of heights that is dominating between Drushkovka and Konstantinovka. And once you are there, it's literally king of the hill. You have the whole right flank of that valley in the palm of your hand. And the main cause of grief would be to try and dislodge you out of there. So if you Ukrainians try to dislodge you out of there, that's going to pull them out from the low ground to the high ground. And you know the story most of the time with the Ukrainians fighting from the low up. They lose. So there's nothing more to say. You can see the movements every single day. The team said that around February, March. It's happening. It's logical. There is no magic into that. It's pretty logical. But most important, it's logical because the Russians did their job, pressing the Ukrainians down at the Konstantinovka seam. On the Pokrovsk side, a very good maneuver that was going towards Novoekonomichne was stopped by the Ukrainians for the moment. But as I said, it's just a matter of time. It's a matter of time because for the Ukrainians, they would need to decide what to do. In order to save Konstantinovka, they would need to mount a counter around that area. Mounting a counter around the area of Konstantinovka would mean that you're going to come from the only highway and that highway is the valley in the sister cities. The other aspect, as I said, is that the Russians were hitting. We need to know if it's still ongoing. The Dobropilla-Kramatorsk highway, the first ring, because there's a second bypass, and then the other option is to come from Izium. There too, there is something funny going on with the current Russians pushing towards Red Kodub. You have the threat to Izium, but most importantly to Liman through the small valley as Chandrova, which is now, I think, at 9 kilometers or under 9 kilometers, which means that there is a choke point for Ukrainian logisticals and whatever rotation they want to do. But once you're there, the other side of the Donetsk, which would actually help the Ukrainians to come from Izium towards Kramatorsk, would be also under drone control. So the problem of the Ukrainian forces right now, and I know that Syrskyi knows this, and probably Drapati knows this as well, is that they are failing to stop the Russians from shaping the terrain. I know what a lot of people are going to say, oh, it's a year nobody took Pokrovsk. Are the Russians away from Pokrovsk? Did the Ukrainians repel them? Are the Ukrainians in a better position, manpower-wise, asset-wise, and so on? Why would you want to go faster and have yet another Ugledar 2023 or Marinka or whatever? This war is now in this kind of situation. Like it or not, it doesn't fucking matter. It's gonna go like this. And as I said, politically, the decision has also been taken up to a certain point to not commit this catastrophe when it comes to the civilian population of the eastern bank of the Dnieper. So yeah, you might call it stupid, pathetic, whatever, but that's the way it is. So yeah, basically go suck a dick or whatever. In a certain sense, Monkey here is actually flexing his control over the Russian institutions by, in my opinion, taking a counterproductive decision against the military, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of Russian IXOs would like to do that, at least partially. But Monkey's saying, no, we're not going to do that. Why, how, whatever, it doesn't really matter. He says, no. You don't need to justify it in a way or another if you're Monkey. We can discuss it, as I said. I think it has to do with the fact that the optics would be awful. Within 2 to 3 weeks, you would have complete chaos and the nastiest shit ever. And people would pin this on Russia and on Putin itself. And who knows, maybe the Europeans will flip and do something stupid and bring us to something worse, which would then change the status quo into, right now, is war going Russia's way to war going tits up. And maybe Russia's going to even win that one as well. But the destruction, the losses, the pain, the type of control that's going to start to be exerted in Europe, and the dehumanization of the Russians within Europe would reach a completely different approach. And a lot of people, I'm going to say that there's a lot of people right now think that they can say whatever they want behind including me, by the way, behind so-called anonymous profiles. If Russia is at war with Europe, a lot of us are going to be in trouble. And you can forget giving your opinion, whatever. So, as I said, the issue with that kind of escalation, which is not guaranteed, by the way, either, is that it would change the continent for the worse for everyone. And then you have this problem, as I said, that you don't know what's going on and who's going to win. And that uncertainty is going to make everything a lot worse because it's an escalation in itself. But I'm pretty sure people are going to try and lecture me over something I never said and misunderstand that I'm giving you an explanation on why it's not happening. Ultimately, what I'm expecting, especially around July, is that if the Ukrainians do not find the resources to stabilize the Konstantinovka scene, the problems they're going to have in July are going to lead to another type of Kursk. And it would coincide with a lot of things coming up. So, first of all, we know we're going to have the Abrams from Australia coming in. We are going to have the Croatian M84s that are going to come online. The residuals of what the Poles gave in February 2025 are going to be put online as well. A lot of IMVs or MRAPs are going to pop out. One of the biggest things that I'm seeing that might be a problem is the IV count, because the Bradleys are more and more invisible, and if you go and check losses on Oryx, for instance, they've suffered theoretically over the half of what was admitted by the Americans as being given to the Ukrainians, so over 320, although I believe that they got somewhere between 400 and 450 M1s, given what I think is the rate of availability of those vehicles and what the Americans themselves said when they were presented with the M1s. There was this guy who said, yeah, we got like 40 of them, but 2 or 3 are running. So, yeah, generally speaking, we are into the decision time for the year 2025. And these are actually compounded by the fact that we are into a round of negotiations as well. And the negotiations, are becoming extremely funny. Because, whereas the Russians, despite the announcement from Monkey in June 2024 over the necessity of the Ukrainians to recognize they had lost the 4 blasts plus, they were, especially after Kursk, a lot more cautious to actually request those. And then we had discussions around March 2025, and there too, Monkey wasn't being forthcoming, saying, yeah, I want this. Although, once again, he had declared in June 2024 that it was going to be the 4 blasts or nothing. Then we had the first meeting in May between the two delegations that led to the 1,000 versus 1,000 PO exchange. And we had Medinsky literally starting what we now know has become a from the perspective of the Russian Federation, and that is 4 blasts plus Crimea plus a series of things, and that's it. There is not going to be any kind of discussion. There is not going to be any kind of negotiation on those. That part is over. Then we had the two options, For the ceasefire, first option, get the fuck out of the foreblast. And we're going to stop firing at you, and then we're going to have a settlement with you guys. And then option 2, which was a very, very, very convoluted way to say, we are going to kick the shit out of you, but we're going to figure it out with or without Zelensky. And that's what it is. The 10 points that were given there, they all go to the same theme, which is pull back from the current lines, if possible, completely out of the oblast. Demobilize and stop mobilizing. There are two different things. Stop mobilizing, stop getting whatever Mikola out of the street, and demobilize the Mikolas that you have, release them from service. And this is absolutely normal for the Russians to ask this shit, because it means, first of all, no more new meat for the army, and on top of that, release some of that old meat that is already rotting in the army, because most of the time those guys being released, first thing they're going to do is not come back. You got it. So the conditions set on the second option from the Russian Federations are a lot worse than just get the fuck out for the ceasefire. The get the fuck out for ceasefire conditions are actually pretty funny, because they do not reduce the Ukrainian forces. They do not ask them to stop mobilizing. They do not ask them to stop arming themselves. It's literally just option 1. You want a ceasefire, leave the oblasts. And you can do whatever you want. You can take more weapons, you can buy more planes, you can get more idiots trained, whatever. We're not going to fire at you. Once you analyze it like this, you understand that it's not that good, actually. But it's still for a ceasefire, it's not a settlement. And the option 2, well, you understand what it is. First, demobilize, don't take more weapons, kick everybody that's foreign out of the territory of Ukraine. So basically, prepare yourself to be butt fucked. And on top of it, the funny parts were that you got 100 days to hold elections to kick Zelensky out. So honestly, option 2 is even worse once you read it than option 1. And in my opinion, underscores that the Russians are not negotiating. And on top of it, the Ukrainians are doing just the same by presenting more stupid shit. Return the kids, get the fuck out of the territory of Ukraine to the borders of 1991, pay reparations and stuff like that. I'm like, you clearly can understand none of the sides right now wants to negotiate the end of the war. One side is because they are currently winning, so they might have a kind of tunnel vision. And for the other side, it's simply because it's the worst moment to start negotiating for a cessation of fire and a stop of the war, because, well, first they're losing, but on top of it, the current situation, it doesn't matter how you look at it, is bad for Ukraine. There is nothing more to say. It's extremely bad, and the Ukrainians themselves, they know. They're not pretending that it's rosy. What they're doing right now is trying to win some time, pull some strings, like the operations that we saw are there to once again influence the kind of opinion they want to influence. The American leadership, the Western viewers, stuff like that. And they have a whole army to do that. Like, I mean, even in Albania, I had like 3 days with non-stop guys saying, oh, look at this. Ukraine did all this damage to Russia. Nobody's speaking about maps. Nobody's speaking about 6,000 guys that are going back in body bags. Nobody's speaking about how bad the situation is on the front. No. Planes and attend to the bridge. Everybody. Brave Ukraine doing that to Russia. Imagine that. Imagine what they could do if they had more weapons. Imagine what they could do if they could have Taurus or a completely different style of bullshit. And I'm like, imagine if they could get nuked. Why would you say that? Well, that's the whole point. that escalation has a backstop, and the backstop is on Russia's hand. But that's not important. The important part is that currently the Ukrainians do not have an answer to what's going on to the ground. On the ground, the Ukrainians are just getting pounded. And the problem with this pounding is not as much that the Russians are throwing tanks and shit at them. It is that the Russians are using probably the oldest trick in the book, which is play on their weaknesses to get out some strength. So the Russians right now have mostly pulled out most of their armored vehicles and are attacking with light infantry, doing raids and stuff like that. By the way, you can complain about that, but now Scala is trying to do the same. So there might be something there. And the Ukrainians have always used light vehicles. If you want to look one very funny video from Kupiansk, you can see that the space program of Kokolia is still alive. There's a very good launch there. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a happy ending. But generally speaking, the problem that I'm finding right now with Ukraine is that they have bitten in their own corn. For some reason, some of the people at the helm of the Ukrainian leadership, they are ignoring the front. And for that, we go back to what I said about a year ago. In order to do that, you either have a plan, so you're not afraid, or you've lost it. And a year ago, well, they had a plan. Shitty one, but they had a plan. They played their cards, and it ended as it ended with Kursk. But it was long, and it was humiliating for Russia. And at the end, Russia is now occupying more territory in Sumy Oblast. It's the Sisyphus myth, but not the kind of Sisyphus myth that the Ukrainians wanted to have. So, back at it. What's the main problem that the Ukrainians have right now? Except for manpower. Truth. The Ukrainians are lying to themselves, they are lying to their population, and they are lying to the Russians as well. But lying to the Russians is not a problem, it's logical, you know. You're never going to tell your enemy, oh, I'm in this shitty situation, although it's not difficult to see. But the two other level of lies, which is lying to themselves and lying to the population. When I say lie to themselves, it's like the army lies to each other. So basically, Drapati had a point. You are shitting your pants, you are shitting your bed, and you come at me and say, okay, we repelled them. And this is one thing that Syrskyi actually did for the whole of Kursk. September 2024, Russians have started to actually move pretty fast. Post-Teretino and Novogorodivka, and both Zelensky and Syrskyi said, since we started Kursk, the Russians haven't advanced at all. And then you go and see the charts and you know that September, October, November, where the explosion of the gains that the Russians did in Donetsk Oblast, including Wugledar that fell early September. Now, why are they lying? Why would you have one guy lie to you, another guy lie to you? Well, it's pretty simple. The system they put in place for the soldiers, the brave one, in my opinion, is directly due to the fact that there is no accountability. And the whole process that the Ukrainians have had when it comes to the description of their battles, their successes, and stuff like that, is deeply rooted in exaggeration, if not outright lies. And Syrskyi himself lied. He started saying that we have 2,000 prisoners of war, and we have 1,200 square kilometers. They never had 1,200 square kilometers in Kursk. Now, they also lied for the strike. And while showing the videos themselves, they showed 22 planes attempted to be destroyed and attacked. They're still sticking with 41 fucking planes. On top of it, once we start looking at things, they knew they were attacking mothballed A-50s. They knew it. It's in the motherfucking satellite pics for 10 years. And they still run with the story that they blew up A-50Us with board numbers and everything, that we know it was a lie. So you would ask, why would you lie? Why would you lie something that you can verify? And there comes the boom. Let's say it like this. Ukraine has been caught in its own strategy of 50% PR, as I said, and 50% actual efficiency in combat. And it cannot pull back from there. And it's, in that sense, the 6,000 guys that died that are in Kursk, more actually, but that the Russians are going to give them back, are a perfect example of that. And the Russians, if it wasn't for the attack of the 1st of June, they would have scored a major point in Istanbul by saying, "Oh, you know what? Here, 6,000 trash bags for you guys. Потери нет." Let me remind you that Zelensky 6 months ago said 46 or 47,000 killed and 390,000 wounded. We know already this is a lie. I mean, like, I'm not going to go back. But there's something a lot more important than it. Zelensky was getting confronted last year over the incompatibility of what he stated over Pokrovsk, the Pokrovsk area, its relationship with Kursk. And one of the journalists literally couldn't stay silent and say, "Are you sure?" Of course, he was not going to say, "You're lying." But Zelensky there showed exactly the tendency that I'm pointing out right now. Ukraine went to this war advised by you-know-who, had some low-hanging successes in 2022 because the Russians were retarded, and then started a attrition war against Russia by literally getting fucked right away. And they had a sign of that when their attack in Kharkov bogged down straight after November, when the mass of the mobilized came in. Now, the problem with the current Ukrainian leadership when it comes to why they're lying and why the lies are so big and why are they so much in bad faith, that's something completely normal. Every single day that advances, forget for one moment the strategic bombers or the attempt to Crimea. I told you, just go to the trends, just go to the numbers. this year, we are now in June, and I thought, not gonna lie to you guys, that the trend of losses, that is still at 11.1 per day, based on Oryx, of course, and we know, I already told you that those are not correct. Losses are probably around 14 to 15 assets per day on tape, but Oryx doesn't count things that do not burn or things that he cannot geolocate over them. But you know what I mean. Those losses, even if we surmise that Oryx wasn't including everything 2022, 2023, and 2024, have never been so big. And it's true, it might be due to the fact that Russian with the Optifiber can go to the end and you can see them burning it, or understand that Max Pro, that tank, whatever, is gone. But the ratio of losses for vehicles is going hand to hand with losses for human lives. And that means two things. First of all, the Ukrainians are getting squashed for now 2 years, 2 years and 2 months, due to the fact that they accept an attrition war after they failed their shot to a strategic counter, accomplishing a strategic task, which is, once again, severing the Crimean land bridge, the so-called Crimean land bridge. The problem with this is that once you have started this, free will, free fall bullshit, you cannot grab yourself to stop the downfall. And trying to do that will show up the cracks. And we had that a couple of times with people like Gay Forscher, who said, the numbers are not on our side when he was in Kursk. We knew they weren't, but that's not the problem. The problem is that people on the ground are saying the situation is shit. People just above them are saying situation is shit. Commanding officers, 47 guy tried to ask to get demoted, say things are shit. And then you go to the cupola, and you got Syrskyi saying, we repelled the Russians 4 kilometers in the direction of Konstantinovka. You go to Cope State, you open the map, and you're like, yes, there is a nuance. It is indeed 4 kilometers in the direction of Konstantinovka, but it's the other way around, It's the other side that's going forward, and you are into a retrograde movement. So then you ask yourself, why the leadership is keeping this thread? Because it's very reminiscent to what was happening in 2022 to the Russian leadership. And I told you guys, that's the problem when you actually choose a bad option, but that bad option doesn't pan out until very late because of trees hiding the forest. And remember what happened between 2022 and 2024. First of all, the counter failed because we didn't have enough equipment, and it failed actually not because we didn't have enough equipment, but because the equipment was too late, and then the plan was bad, and then we didn't have the qualitative edge that we needed, so HIMARS wasn't enough, we needed ATACMS. ATACMS came, ATACMS did nothing. Then, we're gonna win the attrition war, look at what we're doing to them in Avdiivka. Oh shit, oh fuck, they're advancing, actually they broke into Tretino. Then what? Then quick, lie to the Russians that we're gonna make a peace or agreement. Go to Kursk, get butt fucked in Kursk. Oh shit, oh fuck, they're invading Sumy. Oh shit, oh fuck, they're getting back more of Donetsk and Zaporozhye. And they're going to Dnipropetrovsk. And they're back in Sumy. Has anyone who follows the other side seen anyone from the other side say, we fucked up so badly and we need a change into the course of war and leadership. We have. I'm not saying it didn't happen. Draupadi is one of them. I think Draupadi was disgusted by the kind of shit that was put into the operation the 1st of June for the bombers, instead of thinking how to make possible for him to resist on the front line. This is what it is. There is now a dichotomy between the kind of shit that's going on politically, what Zelensky wants to show the world in order to, in his opinion, rally everybody around the Ukrainian cause, and what actually he needs to do as the commander-in-chief overseeing a economy and basically a polity that's in a war. One of the things I'm going to tell you, obviously, is that on the Russian side, despite a heavy veil of secrecy on a lot of things, we can understand what's going on. And yeah, of course, a lot of people are going to say, yeah, Belousov is making things be better than, but actually that's not true. Belousov has inherited a forward movement set up by Shoigu after he fucked up, so that needs to be said. And right now, a lot of the stuff that's happening positive for the Russians is just, executing and fine-tuning what was already seen as imperfect or straight up bullshit before. And still there are a lot of issues, there are still a lot of problems. One of them is politically, the Russians still haven't decided on putting that country into a tighter control. And there is still a frame of normalcy, as I said. I really hope that things would change. It's, okay, too early to say because we're the 5th of June, the attack happened the 1st, and okay, the penetrations should be still there. The worms are still in the fruit. And unfortunately, the only way to get them out is when they're going to pop out, and God forbid, they're going to do something even worse. But the problem is still that they're not going to change anything to the front line right now. And I'm saying this because the Russians are using the least equipment they've used in ages, and that are having, quote unquote, the best result they've had since March 2022. Okay, maybe not March because July was also extremely good, June, July, when Uganda was liberated. But still, that's why I'm saying we are into a completely different posture right now. And this posture is depending mostly on how much the Ukrainians want to suffer. If the Ukrainians want to grab another 150,000 people, they're going to suffer 1 year more, and then what? Don't forget, every single one of those Ukrainians that goes to war, gets wounded, maimed, goes missing in action, or gets killed. It's not coming back to have kids. And yeah, I'm speaking about 25 to 40. So it's a bigger minus down the road. You're going to say that the Russians are the same. Yes, but the Russians are 140 plus. Not 29 or 26 or 27. Doesn't matter, man. So, as I said, the whole thing with the war right now is the realization of one side that is not going to go anywhere else unless intervention. But even the intervention is actually becoming worse for the Ukrainians because the groundwork for that face-off is going to be Ukraine anyway. And nuking Ukraine is still a possibility, with or without foreign forces inside. And for the rest, I told you guys. Right now, 3 axes are well pointed out. There's a 4th magical thing happening in Sumy. A lot of people are saying Sumy City. If you go to a couple of mappers, say Sumy City is safe. No one's gonna actually seize the city. I beg to actually disagree. I think that Sumy is in graver danger than Volchansk for something completely different. Is that now the Russians have the tools that they didn't have in Volchansk. And they are proving it on 3 different axes right now. They're going to take their time, don't you worry for that. But attrition in Sumy, given the positioning and the fact that there is only one real road west-east to get to Sumy, outside of the current Russian reach, makes it a far more problematic situation than Volchansk, for instance. The other problem with Sumy is that the force that helped them so much in 2022 resist the Russians is now a lot more transparent. So the forest is going to be a playground for smaller units, but if you're going to start putting their battalions like in 2022 or even more recently, like the couple of strikes we had in the wooden area around Akhtirka and east of Sumy, good luck, guys. So the problem I'm having right now is that I don't see how Ukraine can get out of this without a Hail Mary, so basically intervention. And of course people will say, yes, but the sanctions, actually the sanctions are going to risk to put a lot more Ukrainians to the ground than just letting the war go as it is. And on top of it, with the sanctions, you might have a radicalization of the world order differently than it is right now. Especially thanks to Trump, which is changing his mind like his underwear, I hope. So, yeah, for the Ukrainians right now, it's just a matter, when are you going to get serious about the fact that you lost the war in the current state? So your chance is either there is a magical escalation from abroad, or there is a Catherine the Great moment on the Russian side, so maybe Monkey dies. Hopefully not, but for a lot of people, especially some Ziggers now, Monkey is a worse enemy than Zhidolensky. So yeah, guys, pretty simple, pretty easy. You might be dooming, you might be pissed over whatever happened the 1st of June, and then the next day over the bridge, but some things are not going to go away. Ukraine is not going to pull a comeback whenever it is right now, and the war is going to keep going slowly and painfully like it is right now until, as I said, the Ukrainian leadership, or at least the military leadership, understands that the political leadership is setting them up for a bigger defeat. And then I'm not saying to depose Zelensky, I don't care. I would like this guy to stay there as much as possible, because his choices now have become personal, unlike monkeys. And this is one of the things that I want to say. You can accuse me of glazing him or whatever, but the man has been selfish at the start of the war, and he's still selfish upon some things. And I said that the decision of not going silo storm on Ukraine is on his, call it whatever you want, soft heart or whatever. He's cocking. It's up to you guys. I don't care. But after that, he had accepted to forego petty vengeance and focus on what's going to make Russia win this war. And the results, we can discuss as much as we want, but the results right now are that in the current state of the war, the way it's going, and unless outliers, Ukraine is going to lose this war, and the matter is the military of the Ukrainian state going to accept to get dragged until there is literally the headquarters fighting, or are they going at some point to tell whoever wants to hear, we've lost this war, go and sue for peace, try to lose as little as possible out of the negotiations, and then let's pretend nothing happens and go back with the Western idiots and start setting up a rearmament program so that the Russians can exterminate us in the upcoming attempt that we're going to do to recover the territory. There's nothing else to be done. There's nothing else, honestly, that I'm looking at right now that would make sense for the Ukrainians. Whatever happens now, unless, as I said, then it's a very positive thing that the Ukrainians break down and the army completely disintegrates, is that the Ukrainian leadership will sue for a temporary truce, peace, whatever, will recognize the strict minimum that can. So basically they're going to give up Crimea and probably going to try to have some kind of hybrid system for the four blasts, like, oh, let's drag this as long as possible, let's put this to a referendum in Ukraine, a referendum to the oblast and stuff like that. For Russians to be annoyed, because this would happen through a ceasefire. And then, through that time, they get foreign forces on board and try and establish a tripwire. But in any case, it will not matter, because in order to have that, they would have to accept a series of conditions, which would literally pull them out of the oblast. And they will never do that. So, yeah, we're going to have more war. And I told you guys. And hopefully, this is going to be a good war. Which means that within 3 to 5 months, the situation in Konstantinovka and Pokrovsk is going to be clarified. Hopefully, both of the cities are in the process of being taken. But I would go gladly with Konstantinovka because it's such a different level of L for the Ukrainians. Pokrovsk is very important, as I said, because then there's nothing. You have the emptiness of Dnipropetrovsk. But you can always attack Dnipropetrovsk from underneath Pokrovsk. You cannot do that in Konstantinovka. In Konstantinovka, you need to go head on and then follow up through the sister cities network, Shkovka, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk. And that, in my opinion, is going to be the worst part of this war. Not Pokrovsk, not the Bopila, not trying to get to Dnipropetrovsk or whatever. No, finalizing the birthplace of this crisis. So Sloviansk and Kramatorsk is going, in my opinion, to be the end of the war as we know it, and the Ukrainians will sue for peace once those two cities are under threat. In between, I hope that Kupiansk finally would go the way of Ugledar, and hopefully this time for good. That was it, guys. Thank you very much. If you have questions, please just ask. I'm not gonna take a lot of them because I don't want to sound rude to a lot of you guys. But yeah, it's up to you. So, as I understand, as usual, there is not much to be said. And unfortunately, our usual intervention from the copper thief turned whiny bitch is not there anymore. So it's a pity though, but he made his own choice. Well, that's it, guys. Have a nice day. To the next. Probably on next Monday, I will have a space that would center mostly around tactical movements, and we will have a special Sumi. Where are the weakest point if the Russian wants to attack it? And unlike what a lot of people are saying, if the Russians want that city this year, it's still doable. By next year, it's going to be a lot more complicated because, as I said, the process would be bogged down, and then you would have to have a proper impulsion. And the front next year, when it comes to Donbass and then the rest of Ukraine, will be clarified. So either the Russians will be too focused on either Pokrovsk, Konstantinovka, or both, or they would be already gobbling Konstantinovka by September 2025, which means that there would be less available forces if you want to still keep the pressure on Pokrovsk on. As for the rest, as I said, thank you very much for the attention. I hope I didn't swear too much this time, and I hope I was a little bit more hopeful than usually. Thank you very much. See you probably on Monday. Bye bye.